Thanks, Dustin. So I'm Mike Cox, and before I get going here, I wanted to point out the fact that this was not something that I initiated. I wanted to hand it to the students. Dustin and everybody, they took the initiative to suggest that we have a workshop to discuss because different students work on different parts of MIDCA and other projects, and wanted to get a big picture. And there have been other people from outside our university right here that was also having questions, and they thought that it would be great to have us all get together and talk to each other, as well as putting this online. So it was their initiative, and they did most of the work here. So I think they've done a great job, and we'll see as we go forth. Anyhow, I wanted to give a little bit of a background of some of the things that my research and some others that have been related to the MIDCA project, what happened first, and it didn't just come out of a vacuum. There's been other cognitive architectures in the past. SOAR and ACT-R are two primary examples. Icarus, many others have occurred before and are much more sophisticated and have long histories. We started really about 7 years ago implementing this, but there were other research efforts that we had before. The first that I wanted to mention differentiated the cognitive reasoning from metacognitive reasoning. In fact, we color-coded. Orange we can think of as cognition and action and perception. There's blue for the metacognition. So there are two cycles. Originally, Tom Nelson at the University of Maryland back in the early 90s and probably in the late 80s worked on human metacognition and noted that there was this cycle of a monitoring cognition and then using your perception or reasoning about that, or your memory of your cognition, to be able to then control and change what was happening in cognition. So there was both a monitoring side and a control side. Back in 2005, I think I was one of the first people to note that it was not only true for humans, but it also applied to cognitive systems as well, and artificial intelligence and meta-reasoning. There's been traditionally a action perception cycle, so that an agent in orange here would reason about after perceiving images, or during perception actually, would reason about the world and then select or choose actions and carry them out. So that is an action perception cycle, as in a very similar way you have a kind of a meta-level action perception cycle in terms of introspective monitoring and meta-level control. So it was Anita Raja and I that first put that together and said that we had a simple model. In fact, we did a book called Meta Reasoning, Thinking About Thinking. It's back in 2011 in MIT Press. So there was an edited book with a number of people using this model, talking about how they had done meta-reasoning or computational metacognition. So if you think about that, it helps to just color code this. I also just wanted to mention that in these slides, I not only will talk about a certain model, and that will be on the left in the figure, but there on the right I give some key publications. And next week when we provide these slides, we'll provide hot links to the actual publications if we can get every one of them. But my earlier work, actually before that, 05 chapter in the meta-reasoning book, or it was 2011, I had my thesis work back in the early 90s at Georgia Tech, which we had a system called Meta-Aqua. So Ashwin Ram originally had this Aqua system that understood stories and would explain things when anomalies would occur that were unusual in a story, would then explain what happened in a story and would reason about the story in that sense. But when those explanations actually went wrong, you would want to then explain why your explanations went wrong. So that's not explaining the story, that's explaining your reasoning about the story. So there was a level on top of Aqua, we called it Meta-Aqua. So again, Aqua was kind of in orange, Meta-Aqua was in blue. You can think of it that way. Really, the Meta-Aqua system had a micro-Aqua within it. So there was very similar in respect. We didn't do this color coding back then and think about it quite in that sense. And indeed, in MIDCA, we don't have an explicit learning box. There's not a box there. We think learning now more of as an improvement in some other box like planning. If you can improve your planning through some means, then that is learning. There's not a particular box for it like you do here in MIDCA. But it was earlier work that I had done. I was very much interested in the computational models of introspection from the very get-go in my career. Later on, I had an AI magazine article back in '07, which I had this very simple system in which I took Prodigy Agent, or an agent version of the Prodigy system that I worked with and my postdoc work at Carnegie Mellon, and I pretty much merged it with MIDCA in a very simple way with a WUMPUS environment. So there was just, it would reason about the states of the world, MIDCA would, and then it would generate goals that would be passed to Prodigy, and then Prodigy would come up with a plan and would be implemented in the WUMPUS world. And that plan would also have the states would be actually passed directly to the perceptual subsystem, and that should be in quotes really, because it just had a little translate function that would take the state from the Prodigy and would put it in the language of MIDCA. It's a very simple idea, but this was the first system I had that used this notion of goal-driven autonomy. The idea that the goals come from not a user or the external environment or is given in the beginning, but the system might note something like, I think it was in the WUMPUS world, the WUMPUS was screaming, and you wanted to try to explain that and generate a goal to quit it screaming. And I think we fed the WUMPUS and it would get quiet. But anyhow, this was the first GDA system that we had. And the MIDCA was really not doing metacognition in the intro system as much as it was doing cognition. So I should have probably put it in both blue and orange here. In the original system, it did do metacognition, but I used it in a little different way in intro. But intro was just an illustration, I think, of what was possible. It had some interesting ideas, I think, and eventually we moved on. I went to the University of Maryland at one time. They had a very interesting system there called MCL, and it had something very similar to what my ideas of goal-driven autonomy was. The goal-driven autonomy would note an anomaly in the system and explain that anomaly, and then generate a goal from that explanation. Here, they had what they called the NAG system. This was Don Perlis's work, Mike Anderson and their students. A couple of their publications are listed here. In the NAG cycle, you would note an anomaly, but then you would assess the cause of that anomaly using this network that they had of indications, failures, and responses. That's in blue. This would be bolted on to other cognitive systems. They did also have a Mars rover. They had another implementation, but it would give them, from the indications of that anomaly, it would generate some failures. So that was assessing the cause. And then from that failure, they would be able to generate a response, and that would guide the response then. So it was actually very similar to this GDA work, and I worked with Don and that group there, and we put together our ideas, and that was really a forerunner as well of the MIDCA system. But the whole idea of the cycle, this cycle that we have, that Dustin talked about a little bit ago, of intend, plan, act for problem solving, the perceive, interpret, evaluate on the explanation or the comprehension side, that really first came from Don Norman's model of human-computer interface, and I first read about it in Mike Lewis's paper in AI Magazine from 1998. He had a very interesting paper, and if you want to look at some interesting work, I invite everybody to take and read these both. They had ideas that I think were far ahead of their times. And anyhow, I took that idea, but we can see Don Norman's model at the top, this idea that there was this intend, plan, execute, the perceive, interpret, evaluate, and there were goals, but those goals, he assumed the goals were you wanting to make, I think the example was wanting to make a document clear, and so you would intend for it to be easier to read. You would come up with a plan to add bold and reformat it. You would actually execute it on the keyboard, and then you would perceive that change to the document. You would interpret it with respect to your plan and evaluate it with respect to your goal to have a more readable document. And the goal, though, was, again, kind of a given. I thought that the goals themselves were subject to change, and that the agent itself, it was interesting. Where did these goals come from? How could we come up with an algorithm for doing that? So that's where this idea for the MIDCA cycle. Of course, Norman and Lewis didn't explicitly talk about metacognition, but it was an easy jump for me after reading these papers and thinking about things to go to eventually the MIDCA architecture, which we'll hear a good bit about. This was the very first paper back in 2011 at a symposium, AAAI Fall Symposium in Washington. And Tim Oates, Don Perlis, and I put together this paper about the idea of the cognitive architecture, and I don't think we had much of an implementation at that point. How many minutes do I have? Anybody tracking that? Pardon? Okay, I'm going to end early then. So our very first implementation, I've got a publication back to 13, MIDCA 1.0. We had essentially put together PyHop, which is a very procedural representation of the shop planner, along with a very simple world simulator that Matt Paisner had built, and a goal generator that would use what was called a TF tree, tilde foil tree, that Michael Maynard had worked building. It would take and do something similar to the NAG cycle, and we put that together. Later on, in also 2013, we went to MIDCA 1.1, which added more detail to this. Had the full GDA process. Matt did work on using a metric called A distance for anomaly detection. It was kind of a low level. We called it a data-driven part of the cycle, as opposed to the K track, which is a knowledge-driven. And we included MetaAqua. That was more the knowledge-driven. We used MetaAqua for interpret. And the details are not important here, but there were two different versions of interpret, one with the TF trees, one with MetaAqua, and we showed differences there. MIDCA 1.2, I cannot find, actually. I am not sure if we had an implementation but never published something on that, or I just can't find the publication. But in MIDCA 1.3, we'll jump to this last year. We got a AAAI publication and some others. In this version, we added a ROS implementation, an interface to ROS, not just a simulator in the blocks world that is more for traditional planning, but actually hook it up with a robot and Gazebo. We'll hear Vahid will talk about that, Shravya will talk about it, and others. Zora, I think, will even mention the interface, and she did early work, Zora that is, did early work on building the API to an external environment other than just blocks world. And then finally, our version 1.4, which we will release on Monday. That is another reason for this workshop. We're wanting to announce and tighten up our code, document it better, add some better functionality, including the use of JShop, which is a full shop implementation instead of the PyHop version that we had earlier in Python. And it has the first significant implementation of the meta level. We've gone 6 years, essentially, certainly 5 years of MIDCA, the metacognitive integrated dual cycle architecture without metacognition in any significant way. And Dustin Dannenhauer, in his thesis work, has made big strides in implementing metacognition here. It's still in the earlier stages. There's some other people that are picking up on that. He showed how the expectations that you would have at the cognitive level also occur at the meta level. And this code release for MIDCA 1.4 will be Monday. And we're looking forward to getting that out, and hopefully people will find it easier to use, better to understand, and more powerful. So thanks a lot. Oh, right, and a lot of ways to go in the future here. I think MIDCA 2, if we can get JShop running with all the past examples that we have in the examples directory with all those other scripts, we can really jump to our fully a new level. And 3, I'm not sure what directions we'll go. 1, it's alluded to on the left in that figure, is the problem, given an anomaly, is the problem that the anomaly is a symptom of, is that problem out in the world that I need to generate a goal and change the world, or is it the problem in my head? I'm lacking some knowledge, or there's something I don't know, therefore it looks like an anomaly to me. Or, is the problem in my head or in the world? So do I need to generate a learning goal or an achievement goal? That's the kind of question. We don't have an answer. Actually talked about it back in the intro system in that early AI magazine paper. We still don't have a good answer for that. Looking for a student to take that one on. And there are all kinds of interesting directions. I think I'll stop on that note, though. And do we have any other questions? I think I went over a couple minutes.
We had a few people joining a little late. Laura Hoffman and Garrett. Yeah, we don't have any questions here.
Okay, anybody locally? Physically present? Okay, so